So hi everyone and welcome. It's a joint Ionburst and Digital Scotland session on the big misunderstood challenge of delivering cloud data protection, privacy and recovery. Because everybody's going to the cloud, but nobody believed it could harm our lives, our businesses, and even our democratic way of life, as we found when you look at what's happened in the US elections. And here's the problem. Despite billions being spent on cloud security, over 35 billion records were hacked in 2020. Now, this wasn't all about access management and phishing, because 82% of that data hacked resulted from misconfiguration. And that's according to research based by risk-based research in the US. And it's triangulated because it compares with the 83%, which was reported by IT governance in the UK. So the kind of statistics prove that our data security isn't quite good enough. And when you look at it, the data theft, the ransomware, privacy abuse are now rife. Regulators have, of course, reacted by introducing tougher privacy regulations in the form of GDPR. The UK has gone through Brexit, and the EU's recent invalidation of the EU-US Data Privacy Shield has added further complexities when it comes to data privacy and sovereignty that the cloud vendors can't help us with. So for organizations using or considering cloud for data storage and services, there are quite a lot of hidden risks. And with hidden risks, we're Scottish, we think of hidden costs. And a lot of you might say, well, so what? Surely my cloud provider is going to deal with these risks for my business. And if they are, well, the stats don't actually show it. And that's critical because we all need to feel protected when we store our data with cloud providers, whether that's AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or whoever. So what is the problem and how do we fix it? As Neil introduced, my name is David Lance, and that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm founder of Ionburst. We're an AWS technology partner and a leader in advanced data security innovation. That's what we do. That's what we exist for. And Ionburst Cloud, which is our latest data privacy and security solution, is built on a simple philosophy of privacy by default, because we actually believe data privacy is a human right, and we bake that into our technology. And it's from this perspective I'm going to share my views and my insight on cloud data security. But first, we should look at the relationship between you, the customer, and the cloud vendor. Oops. Cool. The overriding commercial model between cloud vendors and their customers is called the shared responsibility model, SRM for short. Each cloud vendor publishes its SRM in its various websites and brochures, so please take a look because it's important. I'm going to give you insight into how it came about, why it's important. I'll describe how the accountabilities are broadly applied between customer and cloud vendor. I'm then going to give you my perspective on where the model goes wrong and the problems that result in the huge data hacks that have now reached epidemic levels. And I'll identify key hidden risks and the costs you need to consider in protecting your cloud data. But it's not all doom. I'll also shed light on how you can easily realize the huge benefits of cloud by addressing these risks without having to invest heavily in unbudgeted consultancy, security, and technology solutions. But let's start with why we have a shared responsibility model. Let's start with what is it? So, as I said, it's the key framework that apportions accountability for security and data services between a cloud vendor and its customers. It's important because it sets out who's accountable for what. And of course, that drives risk and it drives the commercial arrangements. So it's critical to know what you're getting and, importantly, what you're not getting when you sign up for cloud. So how long has this been around? Because this is part of the issue. As the desire for cloud expanded, cloud vendors rapidly expanded their scope, led by AWS, and they moved from compute and networking to databases and, of course, data storage. Now, increased data hacks followed fast as cloud adoption accelerated, benefiting from the fact that people are finding their way through cloud. AWS, who's the largest cloud vendor, was impacted most by the hacks of its customers using AWS's S3 storage. And these included high-profile hacks like Ashley Madison, Capital One, to name a few. So Amazon Web Services introduced the shared responsibility model in 2015. So what difference has it made? Well, under the SRM, AWS took accountability for the security of its cloud infrastructure. So it formalized that it was responsible and accountable for the security of the cloud. Now, in practice, this relates to the hardware, software, networking facilities that run AWS cloud services. A bit like on-premise, but just a lot bigger. So any AWS customer, therefore, by default, is responsible for security of everything else it migrates and operates in the cloud. So they do the off the cloud, and we do the in the cloud as customers. And that critically includes the security and privacy of customer data. I'm going to come back to this point. So let's be clear on the positives. Cloud vendors provide massive global scalability and availability services. It delivers a fantastic transition for companies and organizations that can then move from high fixed capital in the on-premises world to on-demand operational spend in the cloud world. There's actually lots to like about that. But like all change, there needs to be a rebalancing of accountabilities. So I'm now going to look at these accountabilities in a bit more detail, focusing on the AWS version. The AWS SRM is illustrated here as a 4-tier top-down model. The darker shaded blocks at the bottom show the components AWS are responsible for, or more importantly, accountable for. The lighter shaded blocks above these highlight what an AWS customer is accountable for. So if I start from the bottom, I'll explain the components in a bit more detail. The lowest tier, supporting the others, recognizes that cloud vendors provide infrastructure that extends global reach and high availability. That means cloud vendors like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, all the others are accountable for giving you continuous availability of their underlying infrastructure and storage services. The bit where they say it's 99 point, usually about 8 nines after that percent. So, and that's good. But to ensure that availability, they typically replicate data, but they don't take any additional accountability for the security or privacy of that data. That remains a customer accountability. And this is an important point I'm going to come to. Now, cloud providers are also accountable for the underlying security, the next layer up of their services. And this extends from physical security of data centers to the operating systems and networking infrastructure supporting their services. Again, akin to what you'd have on-premise, but moved to the cloud. Once again, importantly, this doesn't include the security of privacy or customer data. That remains a customer accountability. Now, we're going to start to move up to the customer responsibility levels now. The data security and privacy tier is the first tier where customers actually assume accountability. And the meaning is in the title. So customers are responsible for the security and privacy of all data they store in the cloud. That includes the data management, the encryption and privacy activities that they undertake, both client-side and server-side. The top tier recognizes the traditional customer-side accountabilities for integration of services, data ownership and retention, and access management. These responsibilities, in theory, don't change much in practice from the on-premise world. But there are a few points that I should highlight. Customers are responsible for all methods of integration with cloud vendors. So that includes web consoles, whether they go in via API or develop via SDKs, or whether they use other third-party tools or applications. When it comes to access management, this includes the responsibility for managing user or identity and access management credentials and access policies to access cloud data stored. So as an example, with AWS, this relates to S3 buckets. So importantly, responsibility for public or open access to cloud storage sits here with the customer. Now, these are all customer responsibilities, and part of the problem is many IT professionals still don't fully appreciate this, as I'm going to explain. But here's the health warning. One thing we all know is that hidden risks generate hidden and unwanted costs. That's not good for business, for customers, and certainly not for data privacy compliance anymore. And this is an important health warning because it starts to shed light on the causes that have crystallized an epidemic of data breaches over the last 5 years. Because many IT professionals committing to cloud don't actually know or understand what the problem is and why it's there. So let's have a wee look at the problem. Go back. Right, cool. If I recap on what's great about the SRM, cloud vendor security is advanced, deployed for massive scale, and that ranges from helping with denial of service protection to high availability failover and on-demand service management. It provides security that most of us couldn't afford and certainly don't have the skills to manage if we could. So that all sounds great. So although cloud management's different, because they can do it, the data ownership responsibilities apply to us or not. You can't actually lift and shift data responsibilities to cloud vendors as you might have in a 1990s outsourcing arrangement. Regulation, government and society's demands for privacy have seen to that. And that's why it's vital to consider your needs around data security and privacy, your regulatory and governance regime, and even your carbon and environmental policy. Because this comes on to the big issue as to why data hacks escalate. Customers don't appear to be aware of the responsibilities for data under the SRM. Sounds daft, doesn't it? But the research and statistics prove this. In 2019, McAfee surveyed over 1,400 IT professionals in 11 countries, and they surveyed them on the concept of the perception versus the reality of the shared responsibility model. And the results were astonishing, because McAfee reported that 69% of IT professionals overtrust cloud vendors to keep their data secure. 12% actually claimed cloud vendors were solely responsible for their data, which seems daft in a world of GDPR. But added to this historic analysis, Gartner research now predicts an even more dire future in which 90% of migrations to public cloud will inadvertently expose sensitive data. And 99% of failures will be down to poor cloud migrations or misconfigurations. And these are customer responsibilities. These are not cloud vendor responsibilities. So we're starting to see where the gap's appearing. And it's no wonder the future looks that bleak when the problem's that fundamental. And what's more, these aren't just survey results, they're actually backed up by real data breach stats. These show cloud misconfigurations and human error are at an all-time high. For example, I mentioned the IT governance research report earlier. That reported that 20.1 billion data records were compromised in 2020. 83% of these, or 16.8 billion, resulted directly from misconfiguration or poor policy management, customer issues. This corresponds also with the US research I mentioned from Risk-Based Security. Now, their numbers are bigger, but they showed 37 billion records were compromised, but they were consistent in that they showed 82%, or in their case, 30.4 billion related to customer configurations. So the 83 and the 82 are pretty consistent from large surveys. So research confirms that the SRM is misunderstood in some way. IT professionals are certainly confused as to who's responsible for their data security, and the data hacks stats are dire and getting worse. So let's now take a closer look to see if we can shed light on what the problem is. So the SRM, as I mentioned before, is a top-down model. Maybe a simple change could be that cloud vendors make clear that the security, the integrity and privacy of data at every point flowing through the segments of the cloud, the bit they're responsible for, remains a customer accountability. And after all, regulators under GDPR and in the UK under the Data Protection Act, the ICO, mandate this. So it illustrates a more fundamental problem. Customer ownership of data can't be passed on. And this lack of awareness, though, is not enough to justify the vast body of research indicating there's a massive problem with cloud data security and privacy. So let's look at what we do know and build from there. Now, we know that cloud vendors don't provide customer data security or privacy under their SRM. So let's look at what they do provide. They provide high availability. But does what they do impact the security and privacy of customer cloud data? Could that be where the problem is? And again, I'll use AWS as a simple example for consistency. Now, when you look at the AWS documents, they state that their S3 standard infrequent access and their S3 Glacier storage classes all replicate data across a minimum of 3 availability zones. And AWS does this to protect against loss of an entire availability zone. That's great, we'd expect this. That aligns with its responsibility to provide a high availability infrastructure. Excuse me. But in doing so, AWS creates at least 2 copies of every data item you store so it can assure availability on its S3 storage platform. Again, from an availability perspective, this is great. But whether that data is encrypted or not, it means the attack vector of every piece of your data on S3 has just increased 3-fold. And here's the unmanaged risk. AWS don't take any responsibility for the security or privacy of your data. But you don't know where the extra copies are or who may have access to them. How can you monitor what you don't know has been created and you're not aware you're actually responsible for? So here's part of the problem. And how can we assure security and privacy of our cloud data when we've got no visibility of what's being duplicated or when, no idea where data is being backed up, no idea what storage media backups are kept on, no idea who has access to our data and backups, and no idea how many copies may be made or their actual lineage. And on top of that, we have to trust that any deletion of data that we make on any data file includes any backups AWS have also made. So the lack of awareness of who's responsible for data and when is critical. It's generating risks that can't be managed, exposing customer data. If they can't be managed, they're not managed. Customer data that's poorly protected on this misunderstanding will be more exposed by cloud vendor duplication that customers can't monitor and may not know about. So the key takeaway is that if IT professionals don't act to protect their data first, hacks resulting from misconfigurations and poor migrations will continue unabated. It all shows this fundamental gap in the SRM model. And let's be clear, this is a complex problem and it's not going to go away. It's complex because we have the world of edge and IoT computing around the corner. And that needs a different paradigm for data that will build on the lessons of cloud world today. But that world needs to bake in privacy by default. And it needs to consider not only data security, but sovereignty and management of cloud store configurations, because the regulatory and the governmental world now have a say. Governments today demand climate change and carbon reduction. That brings in another non-traditional challenge that will no doubt be followed by penalties if we don't solve it. So we now have hacks, ransomware, privacy compliance, and climate control to deal with. Now, soon we'll all be confused at this level, but that's why in the innovation space, we've been working hard to understand the underlying causes so we can develop effective solutions such as Ionburst Cloud to help organizations cut their risks, their costs, their carbon, and their compliance burdens. So armed with this insight, let's now look at how we can practically address the data security gap in the shared responsibility model. Let's start with what's great about cloud and go back to that and what doesn't need to change. Cloud vendors provide massive infrastructure scale and availability. It's what they do best. They also provide exceptional security for their platforms that we can generally rely on. Data privacy and security is a huge problem for reasons we've covered and for reasons cloud vendors couldn't deal with it even if they wanted. The size of the problem is evidenced by the unchecked escalation of data breaches due to misconfiguration and poor migrations. So while on organizations, we are investing more in detection and monitoring systems, in network security and consultancy, and in SIEM and SOC capabilities, which we built up over the last 5 years of the SRM, breaches continue to escalate. So let's now look at the commercial balance for a moment, because this is about a shared responsibility model. So on the supply side, let's get this right, cloud vendors continue to build revenue from cloud adoption. They're making money. Third-party tech companies are selling more consultancy, SOC, SIEM, and services. Regulators, on the other hand, introduce tougher data privacy and sovereignty challenges. Yet on the buyer side, these all drive up customer costs without reducing breaches that now carry regulatory penalties. So risks gone up, costs gone up, and we still don't have a solution. We're still responsible for our data. So it doesn't seem very balanced to me. But what's missing are real customer-focused solutions that deal with the problem, not the symptoms. And that's why we need to embed privacy and security from when data is first uploaded, from its first line of defense, so it's secure and private at all times. And that's the cloud we all want. Private data, protected from upload, while in transit, and when stored in low-cost public cloud, without fear of hack, ransomware, or unwanted surveillance. And this is the new paradigm solutions like Ionburst Cloud bring. It creates a subtle but important change in the customer side of the SRM and delivers groundbreaking security and privacy that turns the tide on hackers. So instead of having a single misunderstood concept of data security and privacy, Ionburst Cloud, as an example, provides a single solution that splits this into two parts because it recognizes that there are two critical problems with the SRM. It firstly transforms data uploaded into a completely private and secure data that can't be interpreted by machine or human. Ionburst Cloud effectively, in doing this, becomes a service provider to the customer for performing this data transformation before passing the secure and private data onto AWS to do its business in this example. This immediately removes the risk of compromise as data has been transformed so it's utterly contextless to any third parties. Secondly, it integrates configuration management. And that's important because that's a big problem area. And it integrates this configuration management cloud storage as part of its solution, so it's baked in, removing any opportunity for misconfiguration. And it can also do this for migrations to or within the cloud and give full reconciliations to build confidence within an organization across its CXO tier. Now, this approach helps simplify the top tier of the customer responsibility because areas like integration, customer data, and access management only need to consider three aspects now. So for integration, customers stay responsible for ensuring their applications or service integrates with Ionburst Cloud securely. But that's what they do for AWS today. For access management, customers stay responsible for their access credentials to the Ionburst Cloud API. And that's what they do for AWS today. Most importantly, customers retain ownership of all data processed through Ionburst Cloud, with assurance their data is secure and private always, because we don't store their data, we transform it, and they control that. So Ionburst Cloud also builds in protection against ransomware at the storage level by uniquely embedding on-demand recovery at the data object level. And that's important because as a result, customer data is stored in AWS as before, only in a private, secure, and resilient way that delivers GDPR compliance, ransomware, and misconfiguration protection. And what's great is customers connect in exactly the same way as they do via AWS, because Ionburst Cloud is cloud native and built on AWS. And this is the best way we believe we can solve the gap in the SRM that gives an immediate return on investment, low friction adoption, and immediate carbon, financial, and security benefits, including against misconfiguration and ransomware protection. So what's not to like? And that's our view of what the shared responsibility model should look like. I'll now go on to basically cover what I've go over and summarize what I've covered in the webinar to help for any questions that people may have. We talked about the rationale for the SRM, where it came from and why. We then looked at the SRM components, using AWS as a great example because it was the originator. I gave my perspective, it's the Ionburst perspective on why the epidemic of cloud data hacks can be directly linked to problems with the SRM, principally around misconfiguration management, cloud store management, and awareness of data security responsibilities. And this is supported by research from the past, from the present, and even predicts the future. And I believe this sort of body of work, so to speak, is important, because if we don't do something, the problems are going to continue and customers will be the poor cousins. We'll end up spending even more money on fixing symptoms and not causes. Our lives, businesses, and even democratic culture will be at the mercy of hackers and ransomware. And that's why we created Ionburst Cloud as one solution to a complex problem that has now to address how we make cloud a more secure place to do business, but also in a GDPR compliant manner, and also without fear of unwanted surveillance, and also without any third-party sale of our data. So I'll end with providing a little information on Ionburst Cloud, just as a solution that delivers, we believe, to be completely private data in a low-cost public cloud. Again, a little bit about us. We believe everyone should have access to the best possible data privacy without it being too expensive or complex to adopt. If we can't have it for everyone, there's no point, because hackers will find the weak points. Ionburst Cloud is therefore engineered from the ground up as a privacy by default solution. It helps bridge the data security gap in the cloud, and it provides customers with a simple to adopt, groundbreaking data privacy and security for cloud data. So we want to make sure our customers aren't left on their own or confused anymore. And what's great is that Ionburst Cloud is actually free to try today. There's the pun. You can get it on AWS Marketplace. And we have a number of open source integrations and several examples available on our Docs and GitLab sites. Contact details on the screen, but you can also reach us or find out more at ionburst.cloud. Now, the only thing that remains for me is to say thanks for listening. Thanks to Neil for hosting this and Digital Scotland, and really appreciate the opportunity. We are serious about trying to help our customers and our industry stop breaches, not business, and we want to help bridge the security gap between data and the cloud. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. Thank you for what was a super informative session. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for taking the time to share that with us. If anyone has any questions, there's a little Q&A box down the bottom. Pop them in there and we'll start fielding them to David. So I mean, it was really exciting. You know, as I mentioned, the mission of Digital Scotland is a forum for technology companies to lead Scotland to becoming a world-leading digital nation. And it's quite clear that you know, what's very exciting as a small Scottish startup, you've identified what is a massive global need. You know, and obviously that's always the most essential factor to startup success. And you know, the light bulb really went on with me early on in your presentation, where you said, you know, it made me realize that so many companies may not be aware of their responsibilities for data security and won't become so until it's too late. You know, the event that will actually make them realize that where the cloud provider stops and where they start isn't something they understood until a data breach has happened or some other horrible security event. So such a simple point, but probably speaks to a position that so many companies are actually in right now.
It's a really fair point there, Neil, because I came from the payments industry, the e-commerce and the card payment industry. And what used to get me is we constantly brought out new solutions that could solve some of the fraud and certainly the identity fraud. And you'd go around the banks, you'd say, but in the UK alone, this is an £800 million, 900, it just kept getting bigger. And the problem with some of the banks was they turn around and say, well, you know what, 100 million of a saving doesn't even get in our top 10 project list. So, and then you start to analyze, well, hang on, that we're helping society, there's pain in people and all the rest of it. And you then analyze who's making money out of it, who's suffering the pain, and is that pain being linked with people who've got the problem, are creating the problem, and the people who are suffering from the problem. And I see the cloud responsibility, or the shared responsibility model has created that kind of vacuum. Cloud providers aren't going out there to create fraud. They don't want people to get hacked. It doesn't look good for them, especially AWS, if they're the big guys, as I kind of slightly picked on there. But organizations also want to have some level of clarity on, okay, I'm paying my money, what am I getting for it? And you're talking about security and availability, and give me these 99.999. So there's a whole load of people, maybe they're jumping to something they think they could have gotten maybe in the 90s. We also have to, so that's maybe one of the issues. The other thing that has really sort of dawned on us as we've been developing our particular solution is that we now have a regulatory environment that really is starting to bite. So to a certain extent, people are getting numb with data hacks, but the pain hits you all of a sudden when the regulator comes along and says, I'm now going to fine you. And by the way, I don't care if your data is encrypted because I can identify it as yours. Then the EU comes along and says, well, we don't like the US Cloud Act. They're looking at our citizen data, so we're going to invalidate the EU-US Privacy Shield. And then there's a Paris Climate Accord. And all of these things are going to be pointed at the tech industry, because guess what? Everybody's going to the cloud. So, of course, that's going to be the cash cow. So governments are going to say, that's how we're going to fund it. So eventually we have to solve these sort of problems. And we want to solve them because we want to move to edge, we want to move to IoT, we want to be moving around the cloud with using the cloud to move around the world and whatever edge starts to look like, so that we can benefit from all these things. But it takes a different view of what data privacy and security is, that from a technology point of view, we've ever really understood it to mean.
Yeah, fabulous. So we've got our first question through David. So an audience member is asking, do you have any evidence or experience of security lapses in the charity sector, which is now hyperactive in digital fundraising via various intermediary service providers? And I think that's probably a really key question, because that's a sector which commonly will not have many resources in-house that are expert in this kind of thing. So how would your technology help a company that isn't that well resourced?
Yeah, it's also a good question from a sector that, as you say, it's underserved, and most charities, even for getting an ICO type, I need an information commissioner, so somebody needs to be my data person for the ICO. I mean, they tend to outsource that even because everything's introducing cost. Now, what we've set out to do, and some of this is supported by AWS, so I'll give them a wee punt here because that's where we start, is that for any organization like charities or any organization that has, for example, fundraising, where you've got that list of names and addresses, that PII, that is really important because a lot of people like to give charitable donations, but not brag about it. So not everybody wants to go and say, I've invested something. Lots of people go quietly around their business. But of course, they get a bit upset if all of a sudden they see their details out there. And the reality is, in terms of the regulations, they don't care whether you're, one of the large banks or whether you're a small charity. If you breached, you breached. So one of the things that we can do for those sort of organizations through Ionburst is if they've got an ability to connect, that's no problem. If they've got a small IT shop or somebody to use, it's an API connect. It can be through SDK. The other thing we're doing is, I mentioned about the open source community work we're doing. We've built a little product called INFS. It's basically a file system. Somebody can actually use that to put their data into Ionburst Direct. And for us charity, you could go into the free tier and probably never move off the free tier, because you're never going to be processing, you know, hundreds of gigabytes of data unless you're succeeding very well. So there is a solution, and you know, I started at the beginning saying, you know, privacy is a human right as far as we're concerned. We want to make sure that affordability isn't something that is created as a barrier. So we would always look to help people like charities.
Great, fabulous answer. Next question. Does Ionburst Cloud simplify the impending data adequacy rules?
Well, here's the this is a fantastic one. Yes is the answer. I talked, and I fleetingly talk, because there are more than one problem about the cloud shared responsibility model. But in terms of the data adequacy, we will move in and out depending on what our friends in the EU decide about us. But they're allowing us in for a wee bit here. The whole issue about data adequacy, as far as I'm concerned, is it covers both the GDPR type stuff, and we should also take cognizance of the data sovereignty issues, the kind of thing that's been brought up by the EU kicking out the EU-US data privacy shield. And the way Ionburst stores data, which becomes completely contextless, so the ownership structure is removed from the data, the context removed from it. It goes beyond simple encryption. Data is encrypted, of course, but it goes beyond that, so that what you've got is completely contextless and obfuscated data. And because we remove the metadata levels to it, and we secure that independently, it means that the data adequacy provisions, wherever they are, because they do move. We've got particular stuff in Europe. We also have customers in Australia and in the US who've got very different sort of arrangements. So that means we can have a common approach to something that is quite a tense problem, especially for larger organizations that have got multinational businesses.
Okay, awesome.
Hopefully you got the over answer was all of that, but the answer is yes, we can help with that.
Okay, perfect. Great answer. Thank you. So I have a question for you. You touched on a couple of points, mentioning the product is a cloud native product, and also that it enables, you know, the baking in of security. And what that reminded me of was I ran a webinar last week with the US Air Force, which is the largest cloud native implementation in the world. Tens of thousands of developers, all writing code and you know, building next generation applications and microservices and whatnot. And he made the essential point that their approach to security is that it's baked into the process. So it's not something they do as a step later down the line. It's actually built into the software. They do everything on Kubernetes, and through various plugin modules, you know, they actually integrate security into the development process. So my question is kind of twofold here. Is at what, you know, where do you fit into the DevOps lifecycle? Where would your product be employed as part of the process of developers writing and uploading code? And secondly, what other tools might be used in complement to yours as part of that process, so that you have an all-encompassing security framework?
Okay. As always, this is where I sort of cry out and say, I'm the business architect, so anything I say from now on will be abused by my team. DevOps, yes, we deploy DevOps. It's the way to go, and we also basically deploy defense in depth in everything we do, because again, one of our big markets, our main market, in fact, right now is defense. So you have to go with that. The issue about the cloud native, but if I can start there, fantastic. I mean, it takes away lots and lots of problems. You've got your upgrades, everything's happening. You don't have a lot of the problems that ransomware on old, outdated OSs sort of create, that kind of thing. So DevOps is a great way to go. and the cloud native ways the way to go, whether you go Docker, Kubernetes, or whichever sort of containerization system you want. In terms of where we could help a large organization developers, then they're continuously submitting code. Now, those code vaults are pretty important. That's their IP, that's their copyrighted stuff. They don't want that missing, going missing. So Ionburst could sit behind sitting behind any of the code repositories, because we're API Connect or SDK Connect. You could do whatever you want with it in terms of that connection type stuff. It's very simple, very flexible. So we can fit in as in effect, a very silent but highly and ultra secure back-end storage transformation engine. We sit between the storage and the application, so that API connects. So we could deal with that. And if you have an organization, something like as formalized as the US Air Force, with the kind of methodology they employ, they will have quite formalized ways of submitting and keeping code up to date. That could be where Ionburst comes in to support that. In terms of where, so hopefully that's answered that bit, or given you a partial answer as best I can to that bit. And I know the rest of the team will be laughing at this, so it's fine. The second piece was about where would we fit in.
Yeah, I was wondering what other tools, I was trying to envisage a complete landscape. So, if you're a large enterprise and you want to make sure it's end-to-end secure, you've just described, where your product would fit in. What others might be used and complement with it to enable that complete?
It could be anything. Again, because we've taken a view that, and this is one of the challenges we've got, instead of going and saying, here's an application that you can just plug into and it does, it's an app that does this. It's like a Dropbox or that kind of thing. Because we've said, okay, we could do that, but actually we don't want to duplicate data, because that's just not the way to keep it secure, that sort of thing. So what we've decided to do is stay at the, as a set, I guess, microservices with a PaaS, a platform as a service behind them. So that API level is the bit that we integrate with. So from our perspective, it means that we can give certainly the developer and the API Connect community, complete flexibility as to how they want to connect with us. I mean, it can be as simple as get, put, delete. I want to get some data, I want to put some data, store some data, I want to delete it. And from there, they can develop on. So we've tried to make the kernel as easy to adopt as possible, because that creates low friction. The other considerations in terms of that means that organizations don't have to change their security posture or their tech stacks, because it's API Connect. And we deal with the rest of it. So if they want to encrypt their data and keep keys before it, that's fine. It becomes a completely no-knowledge system. We build on defense in depth. So it's, in effect, we've got the principles of, what we call zero data at the back end, but, it's a zero trust infrastructure. We follow those. So we've taken the view that we'd rather integrate and align with the kind of, what we think is the supremacy of our technology in creating data privacy, security and recovery, because you get the recovery part there as well, that gives those organizations that want to secure IP at any point, any of their IP at any point of their process, with a back-end transformation engine. So I realize I'm not saying, well, there's this product, that product, and this other product, but from our point of view, it's just a case of we've built the capability. We'll keep on building. We'll build out our SDKs. We'll build out our open source libraries, and that's the way that we feel we can best complement and work with the developer community.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, no, I didn't need specifics. I just was looking to understand the general landscape and how you fitted in, and you answered that perfectly. Thank you. So our last question this morning to finish us off. Speaking more generally, with the goal of building a world-leading digital Scotland, I was wondering if you could comment a little bit in terms of your experiences as a Scottish tech startup. What has been your main challenges, and what would you like to see us? What could we as a community be doing more to help bootstrap and get more global companies off the ground?
I think we've got a number of approaches. Whether it's Scotland IS, we've got the SBRC. We've got some really good work going on with Scottish Enterprise when it when it has government budget and things are tight just now. But more for me, Neil, it's much more about the communities that this is creating, and it's not about playing to the audience here. It's more about the people that will use our technology are people who are serious about wanting the technology. I think as Scots, we've got a really good way of still creating fantastic innovation, be it in technology or across the innovation field. We've done it for hundreds of years. We're just software engineering now rather than bridges, trains, and tellies and all that kind of stuff. So that hasn't changed. That instinct hasn't changed, but there is an element that we kind of almost hold ourselves back. How can we, as a small Scottish innovator, get more traction with the Ministry of Defence and US Department of Defence than we can trying to help small organisations in Scotland that really need our technology, where we could create what the Estonians have had for a while. It's just a fantastic place to come because you will see fantastic technology being integrated. So people won't know us as, well, there's a good place in Scotland to go for tech talent. And maybe we can pick out things that are good, but where are the big tech industries? We haven't created one yet. We tend to sell them off. And until we start to get a bit more rigorous about creating that infrastructure that becomes more sustaining and long-standing, then I think we're always going to be a small outfit, a kind of country of small outfits that create some really cool stuff that ends up getting sold off. And that, to me, at my stage of life, is hard because I want to create something that sees a sustainable Scotland in technology.
Fabulous. No, that's definitely a session we can go into as a complete discussion in its own right. You're really touching on some points there that could be extracted out and made into a really exciting session. So that's maybe something we can talk about doing at a later date. But for this morning,
completely right.
Yeah, fabulous. But for this morning, I just wanted to say thank you. We're reaching the limit of the time now. Thank you so much for taking the time and time out to share that with us. That was a super informative session and really exciting to see a homegrown Scottish company with massive global potential in the cloud computing market. So here's looking forward to your great future success.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. We'll keep plugging away.
And thank you everyone for attending. This recording will be uploaded to the site and available sometime later this afternoon. So you'll be able to check in at a later date and also register for our future events. So thank you everyone. Again, thank you David, thank you Ionburst and everyone for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.